My name is Carl Benz, the man whose name lives on in every Mercedes-Benz car, the inventor of the world's first practical automobile, what many call the birth of modern mobility. Tonight, I will tell you the story of my life. Sorry, I'm not American, I'm a German. Born in the quiet town of Mühlberg, in the Grand Duchy of Baden. And today, please allow me to use English to tell the story, not in a rush, not as a lecture, but as a quiet evening chat between us. Me, the old man who saw engines breathe for the first time, and you, curious enough to listen. You may know me for the car, yes, but would you believe it if I told you that no one believed in me at first? That even my own neighbors thought I was building a noisy, dangerous toy? That without my wife's courage, my invention may have rotted away in the back of a dusty workshop? These are not legends, but real moments, raw, uncertain, and beautifully human. So let me ask you, if you were me, living in a world of horses and carriages, and you dreamed of an engine that could move people, would you dare to build it? Would you risk ridicule for the hope of a future only you could see? Or would you stay safe, keep your head down, and let the world pass you by? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And leave me a little note in the comments. If you could send a message to me in the past, what would you write? I'd love to hear it. Now listen to this interesting story about my life journey. I was born on a chilly November morning in 1844 in a small town called Mühlberg, now part of Karlsruhe. My full name was Carl Friedrich Benz, though over time, the world came to know me simply as Carl Benz. My father, Johann Georg Benz, worked as a locomotive driver. To most, he was just a man on the tracks, but to me, even as a boy, he was a man of vision. He looked at machines not with fear, but with awe. It was from him, I believe, that I inherited that quiet fascination, an instinct that metal could move like muscle, that coal and steam could mimic breath. But he died when I was just 2 years old. I don't remember his voice, not truly, just the heavy quiet that fell over our home when he was gone. My mother, Josephine, never remarried. Instead, she poured everything into me, her only child, her only hope. She worked hard, managed frugally, and never once complained. I suppose that's where I learned the virtue of steady hands and long patience. Do you know what it's like to grow up in silence? To miss the guidance of a father? To watch your mother carry both the burdens of the house and the weight of your future on her back? Some children rebel, I did not. I studied, I watched, I listened. Machines spoke to me. Gears, cranks, and pistons made more sense than most people. I would spend hours staring at carts and pulleys, trying to understand why something moved the way it did. I didn't yet know the word engineer, but I knew this. I wanted to build. In school, I was quiet, sometimes too quiet for the other children. But I excelled in math and mechanics. My teachers noticed. They didn't praise often in those days, but when they did, it meant something. And when I was around 10, one of them said something that stayed with me for the rest of my life. This boy doesn't just solve problems, he sees through them. If you were me back then, alone, fatherless, with only your mother's dreams resting on your shoulders, what would you do with a sentence like that? Would you chase it like a light through fog? Would you carry it like a sword against the world's doubt? I did. By age 11, I had already enrolled in the Karlsruhe Polytechnic School, unusually early for someone my age. It wasn't arrogance, it was necessity. My mother couldn't afford to keep me in childhood for long, and to be honest, I didn't want to stay there. I felt the urgency of time, the tug of destiny. There was something I needed to build. I just didn't know what yet. At home we owned very little, but my mother never let me feel poor. Instead, she made me feel capable. On Sundays, we would walk to the edge of town, just the two of us, and she would say, "Look around you, Carl. One day, you will make something that belongs in this world, something no one has ever seen." And I believed her. Not because I was certain, but because she was. There's something sacred about being believed in before you've done anything to deserve it. One winter night, I must have been about 10, I remember sitting by the fire, drawing in the soot on a clay tile. I sketched a wagon without horses, powered by something inside it. I didn't have the words yet for internal combustion, but in my child mind, I could already sense the shape of the idea. A machine that moves by itself. Would you have laughed at that child? A poor boy with wild sketches in soot and no father to teach him? Or would you, like my mother, kneel beside him and whisper, "Keep going"? I'll tell you now, those whispers were fuel, even more than gasoline would be years later. By the time I reached my early teens, my life had already taken its path. I wasn't distracted by frivolities. While other boys dreamed of war or adventure, I dreamed of steam, pressure, and steel frames. I wasn't like them, and I knew it. But I also knew something else. Every great machine starts with friction, pressure, heat, resistance, and my youth had all three. So many nights, I lay awake and imagined a future where people no longer relied on animals to travel. I thought of how inefficient it was, how dangerous. My mother once told me how her father broke a rib falling from a startled horse. That memory haunted me. Why should the human body be at the mercy of an animal's fear? No, there had to be a better way. At the end of this chapter of my life, before I left childhood entirely behind, I visited my father's grave alone. I was barely a teenager. The wind was biting cold. I remember placing my hand on the stone and whispering, "I will build something the world has never seen." It wasn't a boast. It was a promise. To him, to my mother, to the future, and perhaps to you, too. I suppose if you were to look at a boy of 12 or 13 today, head down, oil smudges on his sleeves, scribbling quietly in a corner while others play, you might call him odd, or maybe gifted, perhaps both. I've always thought genius and stubbornness walk hand in hand, and in those years between 1855 and 1864, I was full of both. At Karlsruhe Polytechnic School, I was the youngest in every room. I kept mostly to myself. My notebooks were filled not with poems or stories, but with mechanisms, sketches of gears, levers, steam chambers, and the early foundations of what I later learned to call internal combustion. I studied mechanical engineering with a hunger you could almost hear, Every page I turned sounded like a ticking clock. The other students were older, more confident. Some saw me as a curiosity, others as a nuisance. But I didn't mind. While they drank beer and chased girls, I chased force diagrams. What moved a wheel? How did combustion translate to momentum? These were the questions that filled my afternoons, my nights, my very dreams. And I did dream. Often, vividly. Machines that could move on their own. Roads filled with humming carriages. No horses in sight. I once imagined an entire city powered by engines. Clean, quiet, fast. If I had shared these visions openly, I might have been dismissed as a mad boy with a loose screw. But I kept those dreams guarded, hidden between blueprints and late-night thoughts. In 1860, when I was 16, something shifted in me. I attended a public demonstration of Nikola's Auto's early engine prototype, primitive, noisy, but alive. Watching that machine sputter and roar felt like a spiritual moment. I remember standing at the back of the room, heart racing, thinking, this is the sound of tomorrow. You have to understand, in those days, engines were seen as impractical novelties. Most people believed they'd never be more than lab curiosities or factory-bound devices. The idea of putting one on wheels? Laughable. But to me, that clunky, oil-dripping, smoke-breathing monster was a beautiful thing. It was the whisper of a future not yet built. So I studied harder. Graduated from the Polytechnic School in 1864 at just 19. Mechanical engineering degree in hand, ready, or so I thought, for the world. But the world wasn't quite ready for me. I took my first job at Maschinenbaugesellschaft in Karlsruhe, working as a designer. The salary was modest, the hours long, but I didn't mind. I absorbed everything I could about production, materials, tolerances. I studied the way metals bent under pressure, the way steam hissed when it was too tightly sealed. I asked questions, endlessly. Too many, according to my supervisors. One of them pulled me aside and said, "Benz, you'd be better off starting your own workshop, seeing as you can't stop trying to redesign mine." I didn't take offense. I took it as advice. In those early years, something else changed. I began to understand that the world isn't moved by ideas alone. It's moved by people who are willing to fight for those ideas, build them, break them, and build them again. That lesson came slowly, one gear at a time. Now, if you were 19 years old, with a head full of radical concepts and hands that still trembled when tightening bolts, what would you do? Would you play it safe, collect a paycheck, keep quiet? Or would you start imagining your own company, your own engines, knowing full well that failure was more likely than success? Be honest. Write your answer below. I'm curious. For me, the answer became clear after one long night at the drawing table. I was sketching an engine. My engine. Not steam-powered. Not like autos either. Mine would be different. Smaller, faster, more efficient. But more than anything, it would be movable, portable, not fixed to a building. No, it would move with you. The idea thrilled me, terrified me too. That night, I closed my notebook, sat back, and whispered to myself, "This will be the one, the engine that changes everything." I didn't know then how long it would take, or how many people would call me a fool. I didn't yet understand what it would cost to carry a vision that no one else could see. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't born to maintain someone else's machine. I was born to build my own. After I graduated, I wandered through a string of engineering jobs, each one a stepping stone that never quite fit beneath my feet. From Karlsruhe to Mannheim to Pforzheim, I worked in machine shops, iron foundries, and bridge factories, places where the sound of steel striking steel filled the air like a second heartbeat. Each job taught me something valuable: how to design, how to measure, how to repair. But what they couldn't teach me, what no employer could, was how to let go of a dream that had grown louder than any factory bell. In 1867, I found myself back in Mannheim, working for a company that built construction materials. It paid well enough. I even had my own desk. But the engine in my head kept turning. I remember sketching valve systems on the backs of invoices, adjusting crankshafts in the margins of reports. I wasn't a bad employee, but I was always somewhere else in spirit. It was around this time that I met Bertha. Ah, Bertha. If I could show you just one thing from my life, one single memory, it would be her walking into that drawing office, calm and sure, with eyes that seemed to know the future. She was clever, poised, and possessed a kind of confidence that left men blinking in her wake. Her father, a wealthy building contractor, didn't quite approve of me. I was just an ambitious young engineer with big ideas and no business to speak of. But Bertha didn't care. She believed in what I was building, even before I could show her anything tangible. She married me in 1872, but even before that, she invested her dowry into my work. That's right. Bertha Benz, long before she became a legend, was already my first and boldest investor. Her money helped me co-found my first company, Benz & C, officially established in 1871. We called it a mechanical workshop, but really, it was a shaky little enterprise tucked inside a small rented building with a leaky roof and a dozen half-finished tools. Still, it was ours. Let me pause for a second. Imagine this. You're newly married, broke, and trying to build a combustion engine in a time when most people had never even seen one. Horses ruled the roads, steam farm powered the factories. And here I was, working late into the night, trying to create something that didn't yet exist. An engine compact enough to move itself, precise enough to be dependable, and revolutionary enough to replace centuries of muscle and bone. Would you have risked your new marriage on that? Bertha did. And so did I. Our first years were hard. The workshop bled money. Suppliers demanded payments we didn't have. Early prototypes clattered, smoked, and failed. The internal combustion engine was still a wild idea, unstable, misunderstood, even dangerous. There were nights when I would come home to Bertha with grease-streaked cheeks and empty hands, whispering, "It didn't work." And she would simply nod and say, "Then we try again." That phrase, "we try again," might as well have been the foundation of Benz & Cie. In 1873, I completed a prototype for a two-stroke gas engine. It ran poorly, yes, but it ran. That moment, small and grimy as it was, felt like lightning. The dream had moved from paper to reality. Still, It wasn't yet the automobile. It was just the engine, sitting stubbornly on a bench, alive and sputtering like a newborn child. That same year, Bertha gave birth to our first son. We named him Eugen. Later came Richard. These children, my boys, grew up with the scent of oil and iron in the air, sleeping just upstairs while their father cursed at crankshafts and whispered to gearboxes. I sometimes wonder what they thought of it all. Was it strange to have a father who spent more time with machines than people? Or did they see, even then, that something important was happening in that little room? But there was more to the work than dreams. I had to navigate patents, deal with suppliers, court financiers who laughed in my face and fix leaks in more than just the roof. The world didn't open its arms to my invention. It frowned, scoffed, and waited for me to give up. But I didn't. Here's what I've learned, and maybe you'll remember it when your own life feels stuck in the mud. Sometimes progress is invisible. Sometimes it's a single piston that doesn't seize, a belt that spins twice before snapping, a fuel line that finally holds pressure. These are the quiet victories. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss them and believe you're failing. But you're not. If you were me then, young, tired, uncertain, but just so close to making something real, would you have kept going? Would you have stayed up past midnight grinding down flywheels by hand? Would you have borrowed more money? Or would you have turned away, gone back to safe wages and warm beds? Bertha once looked at me and said, "You were never meant to work for someone else, Carl. You build the roads the rest of us will walk." She said it without hesitation. And that is how I knew, really knew, that we were going to make it. Not just in business, but in life. By the end of 1871, I had a company, a family, and a rough working model of a gas-powered engine that could, if coaxed correctly, run. It still needed refinement. It still needed courage. But the first stone had been laid, and the road ahead, long, winding, full of storms, was finally visible. In those years, between 1871 and 1879, my life was lived in the in-between, between invention and failure, between family dinners and welding sparks, between hope and hard lessons. Benz and C, my little workshop in Mannheim, didn't look like much. From the outside, it could have been mistaken for a storage shed. But inside, we were trying to change the world. Every nut tightened, every piston filed, every clang of hammer to steel brought us a fraction closer to something no one had yet dared to make. A self-moving vehicle. A horseless carriage. Now, to you, that phrase might sound quaint, even nostalgic. But back then, it was blasphemy to the established order. Horses were not just transportation. They were livelihood, culture, even status. Who was I, a young engineer with dirty hands and a stack of unpaid invoices, to challenge centuries of tradition? But I had to. I couldn't not build it. My first combustion engine, a two-stroke model, was complete by 1873. It was rough, loud, prone to stalling, but it turned. It ran. And that, my dear listener, is the miracle of all machines. To take something inert and lifeless and make it move on its own. When I first saw the flywheel spin without human touch, I remember standing in stunned silence. That little engine sitting on a simple wooden stand was the seed of something enormous. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. The local authorities visited often, too often. They asked questions, questioned permits, muttered concerns about fire and noise and danger to the public. Once a neighbor tried to have my work shut down, claiming I was conducting witchcraft with fire. I smiled politely and then got back to work. Bertha, steadfast as always, managed our finances, soothed our creditors, and even kept my spirits lifted on the worst days. She believed in that engine more than I did some nights. When I wanted to throw a blueprint across the room, she would quietly gather it, smooth the edges, and place it back on my workbench. She never raised her voice, but her silence was louder than any encouragement. Would you have held on like that if you were her? If your husband came home every day with burnt hands, smelling of kerosene, muttering about failed valves and crankshaft imbalances? Would you have urged him on, even as the savings ran thin and your children needed new shoes? Or would you have said, "Enough, let it go"? Bertha never said that. Not once. During this time, I refined the design over and over. One major hurdle was making the engine compact enough to fit into a carriage without weighing it down. Another was controlling the fuel-air mixture. Too rich, and the engine would choke. Too lean, and it would stall. There was no template, no guide. Every part I needed, I had to design from scratch. The intake valves, the carburetor, the ignition system, none of it existed in the way I needed it to, so I invented it. It was slow, obsessive work, a dozen versions of the same part, dozens more sketches. I would sit at my workbench at night, staring at a piece of brass, wondering if I could shape it better, lighter, stronger. I learned to listen to the clack of gears, the tone of combustion, even the subtle hum of a running cylinder. Machines speak if you know how to hear them. Meanwhile, the workshop slowly grew. I hired a few assistants, young men with steady hands and curious minds. I paid them what I could. I fed them when I couldn't. We weren't a factory, not yet, but we were building something bigger than all of us. In 1878, I began developing what I called the Einbau motor, a single-cylinder, four-stroke engine that could be integrated directly into a lightweight frame. The idea was bold. Not just a motor, but an entire vehicle designed around the motor. Up until that point, most inventors had tried to retrofit engines into existing carriages. But I saw it differently. You don't revolutionize the world by modifying the old. You build the new from the ground up. So I built a chassis, a light, three-wheeled frame, stable and minimal, and began modifying it to hold my engine. The vehicle still didn't move. Not yet. But the parts were finally coming together, like a puzzle nearing its final piece. Still, doubts crept in. The money ran dangerously low. Some of my staff left. Investors grew impatient. There were nights when I'd stare at the half-built vehicle and ask aloud, "Is this madness? Am I dragging my family toward ruin over a dream that only I can see?" But every time I asked, I got the same answer. Not from the heavens, not from the workshop, but from Bertha's eyes, watching me from the doorframe. Keep going. And so I did. If you were me, facing ridicule, mounting debt, and a machine that refused to run more than a few minutes at a time, would you continue? Would you bet everything on one more year, one more part, one more test? Or would you walk away? I made my choice. By the end of 1879, my engine had reached a reliable enough stage to power a prototype, not just to sputter in place, but to move something. And though the real breakthrough was still ahead, I could feel it, like thunder behind the hills. The little workshop that once felt like a gamble now felt like destiny. The 1880s began like the others, quiet, tense, full of calculations and caffeine. But something had shifted. My engine wasn't just a bench model anymore. It had taken its first breath, and with every week that passed, it evolved. Smoother combustion, better timing, less noise, fewer breakdowns. Still temperamental, yes. But like a young animal learning to walk, it was finally moving. And I was determined to give it legs. I had a wild idea, and once again, it went against everything accepted by engineers and carriage makers of the day. I didn't want to simply bolt an engine onto a wagon, like others were trying. No. That would be like stitching wings onto a horse and calling it a bird. I wanted to build the world's first true automobile, a machine designed from the ground up to move under its own power. A self-moving carriage with no horse, no tracks, and no reliance on steam. In 1883, I formed a new partnership with some local investors. Their money kept the lights on, but they had little interest in my dream of a gasoline-powered carriage. They wanted me to focus on stationary engines, ones that powered mills or workshops, safer bets, more immediate returns. I played along, producing engines to keep the company solvent. But at night, when the suits were gone and the factory grew quiet, I returned to my real work. Piece by piece, the machine took shape. It had a single-cylinder four-stroke engine, 954 cubic centimeters, 0.75 horsepower. I know that doesn't sound like much today, but back then, it was revolutionary. The vehicle had 3 wire-spoked wheels, a tubular steel frame, a clutch, and a simple chain-driven rear axle. The steering was rudimentary, the brakes barely more than glorified levers, and the ignition system. Well, let's just say it required a fair bit of prayer. But on a cold January day in 1885, I rolled it out of the workshop for its first test. I can still hear the sound of the engine sputtering to life. That delicate, desperate cough that slowly steadied into a rhythm. The entire machine shook like a colt taking its first steps. My hands trembled on the tiller. Bertha stood nearby, eyes wide, hands clasped at her chest. She didn't say anything. Neither did I, and then it moved. Just a few meters. Not smooth, not fast, but unaided. No horses, no ropes. Just combustion, transmission, and forward motion. My dream had turned its first wheel. It's hard to describe what that felt like. Imagine carrying a vision in your head for 20 years, a vision no one else could fully see. And then one day, there it is, rumbling before you, real and undeniable. My entire body felt electric, like I had stepped into the very future I once sketched in soot as a boy. I called it the patent motor wagon, and yes, I filed a patent for it that same year. On January 29, 1886, the Imperial Patent Office of Germany issued patent number 37435, gas-powered vehicle. That piece of paper, yellowed now with time, is considered by many the birth certificate of the modern automobile. But at the time, it didn't feel like a triumph. Not yet. People didn't understand it. Most dismissed it. Some mocked it. And the few demonstrations I gave were less than ideal. During one of the early public showings, the vehicle stalled, choked, and rolled backward into a wall. The laughter from the crowd still echoes in the corners of my memory. Would you have kept going after all that? Would you have wheeled that strange contraption back into your shop, ignored the laughter, and said, "Let's try again"? I did. And Bertha stood by me. She believed that if people could just see the machine working properly, they would understand. But I was hesitant. Publicity made me nervous. Failure made me cautious. I was a builder, not a showman. So she took matters into her own hands. But I'll tell you more about that next time. For now, let me leave you with this image. A small, smoke-hissing vehicle puttering down a quiet alley in Mannheim, watched by stray cats and curious children. The world didn't stop. No one cheered. But something fundamental had changed. The horse no longer ruled the road. That's how revolutions begin, not with fireworks, but with a quiet hum of an engine that refuses to die. Sometimes, when people talk about the early days of the automobile, they speak only of my name. But I'll tell you something. I hope you never forget. None of it would have mattered without Bertha. In the summer of 1888, 3 years after the first patent motor wagon came to life, my invention still hadn't caught fire. Not in the minds of the public, nor the pockets of investors. I had improved it, yes. Better fuel flow, more reliable ignition, sturdier frame. But no matter how much I refined it, the same doubts came knocking. Too noisy, they'd say. Too dangerous. Too strange. I began to wonder if I'd built a miracle or a museum piece. And then, one morning, while I was still asleep, Bertha took the car. Not for a test run. Not around the block. She packed a satchel of tools, a vial of Ligroin for fuel, and, without asking for permission, set off on the world's first long-distance automobile journey. From Mannheim to her mother's house in Pforzheim, over 100 kilometers away. With her, she took our 2 teenage sons. Not to witness history, but to help push it, should the need arise. She didn't wake me, didn't leave a note. She simply acted. And that, my friends, is what bravery sometimes looks like. Not grand declarations, but quiet, steady conviction. I only found out later that day when a neighbor came running to the shop, shouting, "Your wife took the machine!" My first instinct wasn't pride. It was terror. The roads weren't made for vehicles like ours. They were rutted, muddy, barely more than paths in some stretches. No gas stations, no mechanics, no signage. Just dirt, stones, and the occasional startled farmer. But she went. And oh, the challenges she faced. Near Wiesloch, she ran out of fuel. So what did she do? She walked into a pharmacy, asked for Ligroin, used at the time as a cleaning fluid, and refueled. That pharmacy became the world's first filling station that day. When a fuel line clogged, she cleared it with a hat pin pulled from her own hair. When the ignition line wore thin, she wrapped it. When the brakes began to wear on a steep hill, she stopped at a blacksmith and had leather pads added to the wooden blocks. An on-the-spot innovation that became the first functional brake lining. She made history not with celebration, but with calm, problem-solving grit. And she knew what she was doing. At one steep incline, the engine couldn't muster the strength. So she and the boys climbed out and pushed, with sweat on their brows and determination in their bones. I imagine the locals watching, slack-jawed, wondering what sort of contraption had invaded their sleepy towns. Can you picture it? A woman in the 1880s, alone on the road, with a machine no one had ever seen before. And not just any road. Unforgiving terrain, unfriendly eyes, no maps, no instructions, just intuition. Would you have done it if you were Bertha, mother of 5, wife of a ridiculed inventor, staring down an unproven machine with your children in tow? Would you have gone? Or would you have waited, like I did, for the right moment? Bertha made the moment. When she finally arrived in Pforzheim, exhausted but triumphant, she sent me a telegram. Not to brag, just to say, "We made it." She returned a few days later via a different route, testing the car once more under new conditions. That single journey, those 12 hours over hills, streams, and suspicion, changed everything. Newspapers caught wind of it. People began talking. Mechanics started thinking. Engineers took note. The automobile was no longer a myth. It had rolled across Germany under its own power, guided not by a bearded engineer in a lab coat, but by a woman in everyday clothes with a purse full of courage. That journey wasn't just about proving the car could move. It proved it could endure. It proved it could be trusted. And it proved, above all, that the dream I had quietly nurtured since I was a boy, scribbling soot sketches by firelight, wasn't just mine anymore. Bertha made it real. After her return, we went back into the workshop together. She recounted every mechanical hiccup, every odd sound and shaking wheel. Her feedback shaped the next version of the motor wagon. I added gears to help with climbing hills. I improved the fuel intake and adjusted the frame. This wasn't invention anymore. It was evolution. Our family became a team. Our sons, now old enough to understand, began to assist more directly. Bertha took more interest in the design decisions. I learned to listen more than I spoke. Sometimes, I look back and wonder, would the automobile have survived if she hadn't made that journey? Would people have believed? Would I have had the courage to keep going? Bertha didn't just drive the car. She drove the idea forward. So next time you see a car, any car, speeding down a highway, navigating city lights, or climbing up a hill, I want you to picture her, not in a museum portrait, but on a dusty path, sleeves rolled up, eyes steady on the road, hair pinned back with the same pin she used to fix a fuel line. And remember, progress isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like the hum of a tiny engine, the soft crunch of gravel, and the determined steps of someone who refuses to wait for permission. After Bertha's now legendary drive, you might imagine the world immediately opened its arms to the automobile. That investors came knocking, that the streets filled with orders and excitement. But the truth, the world still wasn't ready. Between 1889 and 1895, I learned one of life's bitter truths. Just because something works doesn't mean people will accept it. And just because you've proven yourself once doesn't mean the next step will be any easier. Yes, there was more curiosity after Bertha's journey. And yes, a few more motor wagons sold, but not enough to sustain the business. Most people still didn't see the car as practical. They saw it as a toy for eccentrics or the wealthy. Something loud and unpredictable that belonged behind fences, not on roads. Worse, public policy lagged far behind the technology. We had to beg for permits to test the vehicles. In some towns, local authorities banned our cars entirely. In others, we were required to have a man walk in front waving a red flag, as if our machine were some wild beast that needed taming. Now imagine pouring your life into a creation, proving it can change the world, and still being told, "Not yet, not here." It wears you down. And then came the competition. In 1889, just 1 year after Bertha's drive, a French engineer named Émile Rouget approached us. He wanted to license our designs and build Benz cars in France. We agreed, mostly out of necessity, not confidence. Ironically, Roger did better with our invention than we did. His Benz models sold well in Paris, where appetite for new machines was more daring than in Germany. To watch your creation thrive elsewhere, in foreign hands, in foreign tongues, while struggling at home, it stings. I smiled through it. But deep inside, it felt like a piece of my dream had been smuggled across the border and given a new life without me. To make matters more complicated, another name began to rise in Germany: Gottlieb Daimler. He had also been working on gasoline engines. He had also built a car, different from mine, yes, but rooted in the same vision. And suddenly, the world wasn't just whispering about the automobile. It was asking, whose automobile? The newspapers loved the rivalry. They pitted us against each other like two boxers in an arena. But to me, it wasn't about victory. It was about survival. Every car Daimler sold was a car I didn't. Every innovation he announced was another reason for investors to doubt me. Would you have folded, walked away? After all, I had already proven the concept. I had the patent. I had history on my side. But history doesn't pay salaries. Results do. So I pushed harder. We improved the motor wagon, version after version. We added a differential, refined the transmission, even introduced new frame materials. By 1893, I released the Benz Velo, a smaller, lighter, more affordable model aimed at reaching the middle class. It was a modest success, but modest wasn't enough. Sales trickled in, mostly from the curious and the wealthy. Every buyer helped keep us afloat, but none tipped the scale. We needed something bigger, mass acceptance, and it just wasn't happening. I spent many nights at the factory, pacing the floor, staring at blueprints. Sometimes I would sit in one of the completed vehicles and listen to its soft idle, steady now, almost melodic. I would imagine entire cities humming with this sound, a new kind of music for a new kind of world. And yet, outside those factory walls, people still clung to horses. I remember one incident vividly. A man in Mannheim spat at my feet and said, You're going to kill someone with that thing." He wasn't angry. He was afraid. And I understood. Change is frightening. It challenges not just convenience, but identity. Still, there were glimpses of light. In 1894, a French newspaper organized what many now call the first automobile race, from Paris to Rouen. My cars, entered by Émile Roget's team, participated and did well. Not the fastest, perhaps, but certainly the most reliable. Reliability. That was our word. Others built speed. We built trust. And yet, the market still hesitated. Every sale was a battle. Every demonstration, a gamble. I had to court journalists, politicians, and financiers. Skills I never wanted to learn, but was forced to master. Sometimes, I missed the purity of invention, the quiet of the workshop, the problem-solving solitude. But now, I was running a company, not just chasing a dream. There were wages to pay, suppliers to satisfy, shareholders to calm, and all the while Daimler's star continued to rise. By the mid-1890s, whispers began about collaboration, about merging, about survival. I was reluctant, proud, stubborn. But I saw the numbers. I saw the slope of the hill I was climbing, and I knew I couldn't do this alone forever. If you were me, engineer by trade, builder by soul, dreamer by nature, would you hold out for independence, even if it meant sinking slowly? Or would you consider joining hands with a former rival, in the hope that together you might survive? That decision, as you'll see, changed everything. But at the time, I didn't know what the future held. I only knew that I had built something that worked, and that sometimes that's still not enough. So I waited. I adjusted. I kept building, and the road stretched on. The final years of the 19th century felt like walking a tightrope in the fog. On one side, my dream, fully alive now, moving through cities and countrysides, gaining speed with each new customer. On the other, a cold, creeping reality. We were falling behind. Daimler had momentum. His machines were faster, his designs more daring, and his partner, Wilhelm Maybach, was a technical genius. Investors, journalists, and even engineers started turning their attention toward them. Meanwhile, Benz and Say, though still respected, was losing ground. By 1895, we were producing hundreds of vehicles, but Daimler's pace was faster. They had built race cars, and people loved it. The roar of a Daimler at speed stirred something in the public imagination. It was not just utility anymore. It was freedom, a symbol of progress, of prestige. We had reliability, yes, but the world wanted glamour, and I was tired. Let me be honest with you. By then, I was no longer the hungry young engineer hammering pistons in a rented shed. I was over 50, my hair gray, my joints stiffer than I cared to admit. My sons were growing into the business. Bertha's fire never dimmed, but she began to worry more. For my health, for the future. The business side of things was draining me. Board meetings, shareholder pressure, public scrutiny. I wanted to spend my days in the workshop, not in arguments about quarterly returns. But I also knew this. If Benz and Sia didn't evolve, we would vanish. and my dream would become a footnote in someone else's legacy. So when the suggestion came, quiet at first, then louder, more persistent, that we should consider merging with Daimler, I didn't slam the door. I just listened. It was hard. Gottlieb Daimler and I had never met in person. Strange, isn't it? Two men building the future of mobility, working just a few hundred kilometers apart, yet separated by pride, competition, and 1,000 whispered comparisons. We were like twin stars, close in the sky but never touching. But then, in 1900, Daimler died. I remember the day vividly. The news came in quietly, and I sat in silence for a long while, not in triumph, in mourning. He had been a rival, yes, but also a fellow traveler. A man who, like me, had stared into the unknown and chosen to build something rather than wait. With his passing, something changed in me. The competition lost its edge. It felt childish somehow, and the merger talk resumed, this time with greater urgency. But it still took years. We hesitated. Our boards debated. Lawyers circled like vultures. Investors pushed. Engineers grumbled. Pride stood in the doorway. Would you have merged? Would you, after years of solitary struggle, agree to join hands with a company that had outpaced you? Knowing your name would be diluted, your story partly absorbed into another? It's a question I asked myself many nights. Sometimes I stared at the stars and wondered, does it matter whose name survives, so long as the machine lives on? In the end, it was necessity that forced the decision. By 1903, it became clear. The market was consolidating. Small makers were folding. Large ones were swallowing the rest. It was either adapt or disappear. So I stepped back. That year, I resigned from the board of Benz and C. I remained involved, but no longer as the front man. My sons, Eugene and Richard, took on more leadership. The world was changing quickly, and I had to let go of the controls I had gripped for decades. It wasn't easy, but it was right. And though the official merger with Daimler wouldn't come until 1926, the groundwork was laid in those years. The two great rivers of German automobile history, once flowing in parallel, began to curve slowly toward each other. Meanwhile, our vehicles improved. Our engineers, young, ambitious minds, refined designs I could only have dreamed of in my early years. Multi-speed gearboxes, improved brakes, lighter frames. They raced, they toured, they sold. And I walked the factory floors like a ghost of old steel, smiling at their energy, offering advice only when asked. There's a strange kind of peace in that, in watching your creation grow up, change, become something even better than you imagined. If you live long enough, you'll see the world surpass your dreams. And that, I think, is the secret most people miss. Invention is not about control. It's about release. Letting go. Letting others take your idea and make it faster, smaller, smarter. If you're lucky, they'll remember you. If you're wise, you'll be grateful whether they do or not. I sometimes wonder what Daimler might have thought, had he lived to see what came next. The joining of our companies, the hyphen that would connect our names, the star that would rise from both of our legacies. He probably would have smiled, then tried to outdo me again. That's how progress works. So if you were in my shoes then, watching the name you built blend into something new, would you have resisted? Or would you have said, yes, this is how we survive? Leave your answer below. I'm listening. After I stepped away from the board in 1903, a different kind of life began. Not retirement, not really, but a quieter rhythm. Fewer deadlines, fewer debates, more time to think, to walk, to remember. I still visited the factory often, not to supervise, but to observe. I would stroll through the halls where the scent of oil and molten steel hung in the air like perfume, and I'd smile at how much had changed. No more hand-cranked prototypes or shaky frames held together with hope and wire. These new automobiles, sleek, confident, refined, were everything I had once imagined, and more. I would run my fingers along their smooth bodies, feel the hum of their engines, and marvel at the work of minds younger than mine. Some of those young engineers didn't even recognize me. Just an old man in the corner, watching, nodding, whispering his memories into the roar of progress. It was strange sometimes to feel both pride and distance from the thing I had created. I wasn't the driver anymore, but I was still part of the road. The Benz company did well in those years. Our Velo model became one of the first mass-produced cars in history. Public perception shifted. Automobiles became not just accepted, but desired. The wealthy bought them first, then doctors, merchants, adventurers. What had once been seen as a mechanical curiosity became a symbol of freedom and power. And the world changed along with it. Roads were paved. Petrol stations sprang up. Cities adjusted their maps to make room for us. Horse stables became garages. And everywhere, the unmistakable putter-putter of engines filled the air. Still, competition remained fierce. Daimler's company, now run by Maybach and other successors, was pushing boundaries we hadn't dared touch yet. High-speed races, luxury models, flashy demonstrations. We answered with reliability, consistency, and a growing dealer network across Europe. But all of us, Daimler, Benz, and the rest, could see what was coming. The industry was evolving faster than any of us could individually keep pace with. We were no longer lone inventors. We were manufacturers in a global market. The First World War changed everything. Fuel was rationed, materials diverted. Men who once built engines for leisure now forged them for tanks and trucks. I remember walking through the factory during those years, hearing not laughter and curiosity, but the grim silence of necessity. We survived, barely, but something had shifted. The war had shaken the world awake. People now understood. Machines weren't just for play or prestige. They were for survival. And when peace returned, the appetite for mobility surged once more. Only this time, the stakes were higher. The world didn't want tinkers and dreamers. It wanted scale, speed, strategy. In 1923, my company introduced the Benz 1030, a powerful car, modern, competitive. But so did Daimler, and Opel, and Ford, now flooding Europe with American efficiency. The writing was on the wall. And so, at long last, the idea that had danced around us for decades finally took root: a merger. After years of hesitation and rivalry, Benz and Cy, and Daimler Motor and Gesellschaft joined forces in 1926, forming a new company, Mercedes-Benz. It wasn't just a union of businesses, it was a union of legacies. Two visions, two roads, now converging. The name Mercedes, taken from the daughter of one of Daimler's early investors, gave our new venture a fresh face. But the Benz name remained, and with it, my spirit. Our vehicles now bore a three-pointed star, representing dominance over land, sea, and air, a symbol of ambition that far exceeded anything I could have imagined in my soot-smudged workshop half a century before. They held a ceremony that year, honoring me, a celebration of the merger, of my life's work. I was old by then, 82, frail, slow to rise. But when I stood before that crowd, with the Benz name now part of something larger, I didn't feel small. I felt eternal. People ask me sometimes, did I feel eclipsed by Daimler, by the merger, by the speed of change? No. Because you see, this wasn't just about me. It never was. I had carried the torch for as long as I could. Now it was passed on, into stronger hands, faster minds, broader horizons. If you were me then, an old man standing on the edge of a new age, would you mourn the past? Or marvel at what the dream had become? I chose to marvel, and I urge you to do the same. In the years that followed, I faded quietly into the background. My health declined, but my heart never let go of that sound, the rhythmic hum of progress, of pistons, of dreams turning wheels. I often sat in the passenger seat while my sons or their colleagues drove. The roads were smoother now, the cars faster. But I always kept one hand on the body, feeling the vibration of the engine. That thrum? That was me. It was all of us, forged in steel, powered by stubbornness, and guided by love. On April 4th, 1929, I passed away, peacefully, at home. Just 2 years later, the world plunged into depression. Just a few more after that, another war would begin. But the car, the idea, survived. And so did my name. If I could whisper something to the younger version of myself, to that soot-covered boy with big dreams and no money, it would be this: you did it. And if you, dear listener, ever find yourself doubting whether your dream is worth the fight, remember this: sometimes it takes a lifetime. Sometimes it takes storms, ridicule, and the quiet courage of the people who love you. But if the dream is real, hold on. The road may be long, but it is yours to build. After I was gone, I often wondered, quietly, invisibly, like a wind between the trees, if the world would still carry my name forward, not on plaques or buildings or even in books, but on something living, something that moved. It didn't take long to know the answer. Mercedes-Benz wasn't just a company. It became an institution, a symbol of engineering, precision, and elegance. The three-pointed star that once rose timidly above the hood of a single car now gleamed across continents. It soared through decades, through deserts and racetracks, through wars and revolutions. They say machines don't have souls, but I knew better. Every time one of those engines roared to life, I felt it. A pulse I had once nurtured in a tiny workshop under gaslight. I saw young dreamers in Tokyo, in Detroit, in Johannesburg, all pointing to the star, imagining their own future behind the wheel. People don't dream about what is. They dream about what could be. That's what the car gave them. That's what it still gives them now. And while the company grew, expanding into planes, trucks, electric motors, autonomous systems, the spirit remained. Innovation, yes, but also responsibility. The vehicle was never just about power. It was about connection. About giving ordinary people the extraordinary freedom to choose their own road. Funny, isn't it? My first motor wagon had less horsepower than a lawnmower. Now Mercedes-Benz builds machines that glide silently with electric grace, or roar with 600 horses under the hood. Some drive themselves. Some race at speeds I would have thought impossible. All of them carry echoes of those early sketches drawn in soot and hope. Sometimes I watch from wherever I am now, hovering gently through the blur of time. I see families piling into cars for road trips. I see doctors rushing to patients. I see a young woman, perhaps not unlike Bertha, driving alone at dawn, windows down, wind in her hair, thinking her own thoughts, daring to go farther. And I smile. If you own a car, any car, you are part of this story. It doesn't matter if it's a Benz or not. What matters is that it moves, and it moves you. So now I ask you again, if you were me walking the same road, would you have made the same choices? Would you have clung to the dream through the laughter, the bankruptcy notices, the blown gaskets, the late nights? Would you have kept going? And if not, what dream of yours still waits to be built? Leave me a comment below if you could send a message to me in the past, me with oil on my fingers and worry in my eyes. What would you write? Now, let's bring this story to a gentle stop. The road always narrows at the end. In those final days of my life, I often sat by the window, watching the street outside. Children playing, wheels spinning, a car humming gently past, its engine barely louder than the rustle of leaves. And I would think, yes, it's working. It's all still working. I didn't live to see the moon landing, the rise of computers, or the quiet grace of electric vehicles. But I saw enough. Enough to know that the seed we planted, not just Bertha and I, but all of us who dared to build, had taken root in the hearts of millions. My children carried the torch well, and their children after them. Even today, generations on, the Benz name stands, not just in steel or on logos, but in a legacy of motion. In engineering that doesn't settle. In design that respects the past but leans forward, always. You might be surprised to learn, I never drove much, not in the way people drive now. I rode, I tested, I adjusted, but I wasn't the man gripping the wheel on long highways. That was never the point. For me, it was never about driving. It was about giving people the choice to go. That, my dear listener, is the quiet revolution. So when you next get into a car, whether it's humming with electricity or fueled by old oil, take a moment. Run your hand along the wheel. Listen to the soft whir of motion. Know that you are part of something vast and beautiful and still unfolding. And if your own dream is still in pieces, still scattered across blueprints and doubts and long nights, do not despair. Because steel can be shaped, engines can be born, and roads can be built where none existed before. Thank you for listening. Sleep well and drive forward. Sweet dreams.